I never touched a Metroid Prime game until this year, and everyone I talked to told me the first game was the best of the series and that the second one was a harder, more frustrating experience. Yet here I am, 21 years after its initial release, playing it for the first time. I believe definitively that Metroid Prime 2 Echoes blows the first one out of the water, and I don't think it's that close. Let's discuss it. For those of you that are new to my channel, my first video I ever made after making the switch to covering video games was actually based on my experience playing through the original Metroid Prime for the first time in the year 2025. My goal this year was to play through the original trilogy of games so that I could love and appreciate Metroid Prime 4 upon its release as someone who has actually played through and appreciated the original trilogy. And that took me to where we are today with Metroid Prime 2. Before I began my journey through these games, I kept getting fed one constant bit of information. The trilogy is amazing, but the second game is hard, the second game is frustrating, and the second game is just not as good as the original. And these concerns continued well after I finished and uploaded my first Metroid Prime video a few months ago, where people would say, oh, you found this part hard in the first one, wait till you get to the second game, it's worse. So, going into Echoes, I was a bit concerned because I loved the first Metroid Prime game, but I definitely struggled with certain aspects of the game, the darkness in some spots, the backtracking, and, well, of course, the controls at times. So obviously a lot of these complaints and concerns were going to carry over to a game from the same franchise released only a few years later on the same platform, right? So why did I love this game so much more than the original? I believe that it's because there are so many issues with the first game that are directly fixed in this one. But before we get into that discussion about the issues that I think got fixed, we'll do that later in the video. I want to start this video off with a discussion surrounding atmosphere and world building through storytelling. I want to preface something. In my Metroid 1 playthrough, I didn't go out of my way to find all the lore as I was just experiencing a blind playthrough of the game, so whatever I found, I found. So when I make the following remark of the story in Metroid Prime 1 was good, but a bit of an afterthought, that remark comes from a place of I wasn't going out of my way to try and understand and find everything and 100% the game on my first playthrough because I didn't want to use a guide to look things up. So it might be a bit unfair, but I did find the story for Metroid Prime 1 to be a bit underwhelming at times. This is what led me to preferring the story of Metroid Prime 2 as it was more consistently being communicated to the player through the Luminoth characters, causing me to care more about what was happening on the planet Aether as opposed to just having to find all of the lore on your own. On top of the Luminoth's dialogue with Samus, the reason for being on the planet makes a lot more sense. In the first game, Samus happens upon Talon 4 by chance after answering a distress signal sent out from Orpheon, and she only goes to the planet to chase Meta Ridley, who flees there from the space pirate frigate. Of course, once on the planet, Samus discovers the remnants of the Chozo civilization, the very species that raised her, but everything about this just feels more accidental than intentional. And the lack of a living, breathing character to have an actual dialogue with Samus made it harder for me to follow and care about. Yes, I know a beloved aspect of these games is the lack of dialogue and a higher focus on ambiance and world building through exploration, but something would have been nice there. Contrast that with the second game where Samus is dispatched to the planet Aether to aid the Galactic Federation, an organization that she has prior ties to after one of their ships of troops vanishes. Once she arrives on the planet and learns of the death of the entire deployment of soldiers, she meets Yumos of the Luminoth in the Great Temple and is told of the war that they are losing against the Ing species. And at this point, it's on Samus to intervene and fight the war on behalf of the Luminoth because they're almost wiped out. And it just draws on her sense of empathy and justice as a character, and it makes the mission feel that much more impactful. Having that actual dialogue present makes me care more. Where the first game is driven by discovery and exploration, the second game is driven by survival and a will to be the hero and save the day. And that just simply resonates with me more as a player. Now, when we discuss the actual environments of the two games, the most common response I got was that the second game felt repetitive due to the light and dark world backtracking through mostly identical areas. Now, I can totally see why people think this way and feel this way, and I respect it 100%. But to explain it from my point of view and how I'm feeling about things, in Metroid Prime 1, it feels like you're playing a video game, and in Metroid Prime 2, I just felt immersed in the world that I was in. Let me explain. In the first game, you have multiple areas that, while well designed and interesting in their own regards, feel like the obligatory overgrown jungle, the lava level, the ice level, and so on. Kind of like a checklist of common themes you'd find in games. This is not at all to say that I dislike these levels, because they're very well thought out in their own regards, but they definitely feel like the obligatory video game level and environment that you find across any adventure game. Again, not bad, just not as immersive and engaging as I would hope for. The second game also is split up into distinct areas: wastelands, swamps, futuristic fortresses, but these areas felt less like your standard environments in an adventure game and a more fleshed out world built for Metroid Prime 2 echoes. It's a bit hypocritical, I know, but when it comes to my recollection of my playthrough of Metroid Prime 1, there's definitely parts of different levels, the Chozo Ruins, the Phendrana Drifts, that I just can't quite remember parts of because it just wasn't as memorable. Whereas you look at Metroid Prime 2 and you got the Torvus Bog and the Sanctuary Fortress, which are like ingrained in my head with how impactful and amazing those levels were. And that's without even factoring in the Dark World side of things. I'm just talking about their base Light World levels as a direct comparison to Metroid Prime 1. That reason alone made Echoes feel more exciting to sit down and play, as I wanted to explore these areas to their max. And with the inclusion of the Dark World counterparts, where stronger enemies await you, especially an important one that we'll talk about soon, the levels expand far beyond where the first game wishes it could. Naturally, I think any discussion surrounding the first two Metroid Prime games regarding which is better is going to boil down to how people feel about the Light World, Dark World mechanic. I personally love the Dark World, and I think that if you stripped away everything else about this game that I think does a better job than the first one, and you just left the Dark World implementation, I would still probably like it more than the first Metroid Prime game. Early in the game, during the tutorial, Samus has a run-in with her Dark Samus counterpart for the first time, and she's whisked away into the Dark World, leading to the removal of all her additional power-ups and abilities. As I mentioned in my review of the original game, I kind of love how stripping the powers from Samus occurs in these games. It feels natural and it adds a sense of weight to the situation. Throughout the early stages of the game, Samus traverses the land in the same manner as she does in the first game, until she stumbles upon the Great Temple and meets Umos. During this interaction, Samus gains the ability to translate Violet messages that expand on lore pathways and is able to reach the first major level, the Agon Wastes. It is here that Samus earns the first of the beam upgrades in the game, the Dark Beam, and is able to open the first voluntary portal to the Dark World. A quick side note on the colored translators mechanic: I think this system for lore and exploration is great, since it makes hidden messages and areas more exciting to look for, as there's a strong visual indicator that's easier to spot than the lore spots in the first game, as well as visually showing places you need to return to once you learn more of the languages, without it feeling out of place. But getting back on track now with the Dark World itself, when you first make your way there in the Agon Wastes, you're immediately faced with danger, experiencing life being taken away when Samus strays too far from the light crystals placed down by the Luminoth. I assume this mechanic is the source of frustration a lot of people have with the Dark World, as it slows the gameplay down to a halt, trapping Samus in these small, confined bubbles of safety when fighting enemies and bosses, as well as acting as breakpoints to regain health, which is a very necessary function of these safe spots. This definitely slows down the gameplay in the early stages of the game, because you have to constantly stop in these little spots to assess the situation in your environment and make sure that you know where you're going next. You need to be able to stop and look at the map and maybe plan out your next route, or see where you're trying to get to next in terms of where there's doors that you can actually access to progress forward in the levels. And with such low amounts of energy early on in the game, the chip damage you take from running through the Dark World and not stopping to take breaks in the crystal safe zones, if you will, it really starts to add up, and you will get burned if you don't take a second to breathe. I think this works incredibly well. I felt cautious in a dark and twisted world that was both familiar and foreign. The early game dark areas teach you to play the game smart, and as you increase your energy throughout the game before eventually getting the Dark Suit upgrade, you feel a true sense of growth, as you can now sprint through darkness without fear because you were able to be patient and survive the early game. It's not often that a game makes you feel this rewarded for taking your time through the beginning stages of an adventure. The last major element that comes with the Dark World is a perfect antagonist to Samus herself. Dark Samus is the perfect enemy. They make use of Samus's toolkit, but always feels like they are a power level above you, making maneuvers and using powers unavailable to the real Samus. Dark Samus visually works because they don't just appear out of nowhere without any context. Kind of like, let's say, Shadow Link does in the original Zelda 2 Adventure of Link. Also, timeout, heads up, this is a massive spoiler warning for the rest of the video, as I'm going to talk about the ending to Metroid Prime 1 all the way to the ending of Metroid Prime 2. So if there's things you don't want to get spoiled on, go play these amazing games and then come back and finish this video. Okay? Great. In the secret ending to the original Metroid Prime game, we see that Metroid Prime itself, moments away from death, fused with Samus's Phazon suit and DNA. There's so many great resources out there that explain this in depth, but on a surface level, Samus's actions directly led to the birth of her own dark counterpart. This boss constantly shows up throughout the progression of the game and feels like it's using these fights to size you up, learn and study you in a hope to grow stronger and eventually accomplish the goal it failed to do before: defeat Samus. And going back to Metroid Prime 1, don't get me wrong, I liked the Meta Ridley fight. It was really fun. But Meta Ridley just kind of like appears in the tutorial, flies overhead when you're in the Phendrana Drifts as like a little, ooh, remember I'm here, and then you fight it, and it just doesn't feel like it has the same stakes as Dark Samus, who is a direct antagonist to Samus and constantly shows up and you have to interact with them throughout your entire playthrough of the game. It just makes me care more. Meta Ridley's cool, Dark Samus is cool and impactful. You take the way that Meta Ridley works and you contrast that with the constant roadblocks Dark Samus puts up, forcing you to fight throughout the game enough times that when you do meet for the final time, the moment feels bigger and the satisfaction for finally defeating them hits harder. The surprise factor of walking into a room only to be ambushed by Dark Samus makes for some incredibly intense, and depending on your energy levels, threatening encounters. These moments heighten the game overall and are another defining separator for me in crowning the second game king. Earlier in the video, I teased that there were a ton of fixes for this game that overall made it better than the original, in my eyes. I know I talked about the atmosphere and feel of the levels, but I want to quickly talk about the actual things I enjoyed beyond just the aesthetics. When it comes to the levels in Metroid Prime 2, I believe that there's three key things over the original: better flow, better puzzles, better boss fights. Starting off with the flow of this game and the individual levels, in each level, like in a lot of adventure games with dungeons, so to speak, your objectives can be boiled down to exploring, finding a new weapon or power-up, fighting a mini-boss or two, and then taking on the main boss at the end. The way the Temple Grounds, the Agon Wastes, the Torvus Bog, and the Sanctuary Fortress I laid out, they offer a perfect balance of allowing for exploration while steering you in a forward direction. The one thing that stands out in my mind is how well they intertwine the light and dark worlds in each level, making sure the player has to traverse them cohesively to advance to the next objective. Whether it's getting to the next upgrade, the finding of the next beam, or tracking down the next temple key, these levels keep that sense of excitement and intrigue as to where you gotta go next. In the original game, I found myself aimlessly wandering around areas I had explored before, with no real sense of direction or progression to be found, outside of maybe the third area in the Phazon Mines. Whereas in this game, I always felt confident that I was moving forward and I would hit the next big moment in due time. As far as which level in the game I think exemplifies this the best, I would go with the Torvus Bog. The Torvus Bog is a massively sprawled out swamplands that takes home the achievement of being an old school water level that doesn't make me want to scream and rip my hair out. The options when you first arrive here are so open that I wandered around for 45 minutes begging for a save room to appear as I was a hit or two away from death, only to circle around the entire level and find one next to the entrance. Silly me. Usually this would upset me, but I never once felt like I was retracing the same steps over and over, and instead only ended up back in a familiar spot once I traversed the majority of the level. Once you get through half the area, an entire underwater sublevel opens up and the vibe of the level shifts perfectly. This area features so many great moments that showcase the amazing way in which the developers maneuvered the player between the light and dark world, with them constantly sending you back to this underwater bunker of sorts throughout the rest of the game. Outside of the Torvus Bog, I do want to show some love to the other major areas. The Temple Grounds serve as an excellent hub world for the game, and it felt more interesting to explore to me than the Talon Overworld. I always felt like there was more to see, more upgrades to find, and there was entire areas I didn't even discover until the end game when I was looking for the Sky Temple keys. The Agon Waste probably was my least favorite of the worlds, but only because the level shares a similar issue that I had with the Chozo runes in the first one, and that's that they share too much of a similar feel during their first impressions when you enter the level, to the hub world, so it doesn't feel like a significant jump into a new area like the Magmore Caverns or the Sanctuary Fortress does. I'm not saying that these levels are entirely identical to the hub worlds, just that, like I said, their initial impressions left a bit of a bitter taste in my mouth initially. Speaking of the Sanctuary Fortress though, I legitimately was blown away by how awesome this level is. For an isolated level, dungeon, whatever you want to call it, it is one of my favorite individual areas in any old school game from that era. The music, the visuals, the Dark Samus fight, the Spider Guardian, the Quadraxis fight, the reactor, the Yinghive, literally every aspect of this level was perfect. I have no more thoughts on it. That's everything. Those are the notes. The Sanctuary Fortress rules. You have to experience it for yourself, trust me. It's so, so good. This game, like the first one, is not super heavy on puzzle solving. I find action-adventure games from other franchises to have a bigger focus on puzzles. That being said, both games do use moments of light puzzle solving to uncover extra energy or missile upgrades, or sometimes some bigger scale puzzles to advance in the level. In Echoes, there were several instances where I completed a puzzle and said, "Nice," out loud to myself in a dark and quiet gaming room. And we all know that that's the kind of defining moment that sticks out for a player while playing through a game. All kidding aside, there are countless Spider Ball, Morph Ball, and Visor puzzles throughout this game that made me genuinely feel accomplished for getting through them. The nice thing that this franchise does, both of the games, 1 and 2, is that a lot of these puzzles lead to extra upgrades like missiles and energy, so if something's really difficult and you're not getting the platforming down or whatever, you're not forced to sit there and grind it out, but if you take the time to do it, you're truly rewarded. Like I said, this game isn't so much more involved when it comes to the puzzles over the first game, but I couldn't help but notice more enjoyment in completing the ones in Echoes. I just mentioned the Spider Ball, and I think that segues perfectly into the final of the 3 points, the boss fights. I think the most incredible thing that this game does is introduce mini-bosses that are called the Guardians that take advantage of all the lost powers that Samus is missing and uses them against you. In Echoes, there are 3 categories of bosses: major boss fights, Dark Samus, and the Guardians. Often in games that have mini-bosses scattered throughout levels, they tend to be themed to whatever level you are in, which from an aesthetics point of view can be really cool. But in this game, having the mini-bosses all be Guardians that are a part of the same evil regime you are fighting to defeat that take advantage of Samus's powers is such an incredible choice. It would have been easy for them just to make the mini-boss fights themed around the environments they're in and just lock the power-up away in the room next door for when you defeat them, but instead having them directly use and be named after power-ups you need, it adds that extra oomph to the fight itself because you know what you're fighting for. Some of them were really difficult fights and posed a real threat as far as mini-bosses go. The Boost Guardian and Grapple Guardian especially stand out as memorable boss fights that were just very, very difficult. In fact, looking at the comments from my first video, a user by the name Wheeljack2K hinted that I would, quote, love the Boost Guardian, which I assume is referencing my blow-up regarding my disdain for the Cloaked Phantom in the first game. Kind of a comment on, well, you didn't like this part of this game, just wait till you get to this one, it's worse. That kind of a vibe. And honestly, as far as the boss fight itself goes, they were right. But if you go back and watch my first video, you'll realize that my rant wasn't necessarily about, oh, the Cloaked Phantom is so hard and unfair. It was, you have to spend 45 minutes without a save room to get to the Cloaked Phantom to even have a chance at fighting it. And because it was a bit of a cheeky boss fight, you wouldn't really get much of an attempt, and then you'd have to redo the entirety of the level again. The issue is always about getting back there just to lose and not getting the chance to learn, only to spend almost an hour getting back to it, which nearly kept me from finishing the first game. In Echoes, based on my notes I took and whatever I remember from my playthrough, I never took on a boss fight or difficult section that did not have a save room immediately before or within a reasonable length of time, maybe a couple rooms away beforehand. The Boost Guardian, for example, took me 4 or 5 attempts to beat, but there's a save spot in the room right before it. So despite losing over and over, I was having a lot of fun, and I knew I could just sit there and grind it out and keep learning from each subsequent try without the pain of a long trek back that would make me lose motivation or force me to look up the solution just so I could progress. The major boss fights in this game were more exciting as well. Again, these are all personal opinions, and it does not mean I dislike the first game at all, but Amorbus, Chaika, Quadraxis are all incredible fights that had me on the edge of my seat and served as memorable ends to the 3 major areas in the game. And with that, we've covered everything about this game that I really wanted to focus on and talk about, except for the end game and the final boss. So again, I know I said it before, spoiler warning, if you don't want to be spoiled on the end of the game, that's what the rest of the video is on. So go play this game and then come back and finish this video. Once you get through the Sanctuary Fortress and you hunt down all the Sky Temple keys, you make your way up to the aptly named Sky Temple to take on the Emperor Ing. And oh my god, this fight was hard. I legitimately do not think I would have beaten it had I not found as many upgrades for missiles and energy as I did during my playthrough. The boss has 3 forms. Its initial form has a bunch of tentacles that it attacks you with. The second form, its chrysalis form, where you make use of the spider ball, you maneuver around it and bomb it while avoiding the toxic gas that fills the room. This phase, by the way, you can kind of cheese and you can kind of use it as a refill station. It takes a while, but you can leave this section of the boss fight with max beam ammo, max missile ammo, and max energy, which honestly, I recommend you look up how to do and you try it, because the third phase of this fight is honestly brutal. You're gonna need the extra health. You're gonna need the extra ammo. Don't feel bad about taking advantage of this exploit, I guess. Look it up. You'll thank me later. Trust me. Like I said, the third form is brutal, requiring well-timed shots into its mouth using the opposite beam at the time of the attack. After several tries, I finally defeated the Emperor Ing with a sliver of health to spare. And it is here that we are met with the iconic timed escape sequence the Metroid series loves to use, where we get to chase down Dark Samus as we attempt to get out of the Sky Temple. The chase is short-lived, however, before meeting face-to-face with the true final boss. Surprise, surprise, it's Dark Samus again. After hours of attempts to beat the Emperor Ing, I quickly fell victim to the final encounter with Dark Samus. But wait a sec. Yeah? I'm being told that this is not Metroid Prime 1, and the game shows another sign of grace and humility, and if you die during the Dark Samus portion of the fight, you do not have to re-fight the Emperor Ing, and instead, you go to the start of the chase sequence with full health and another attempt at Dark Samus, as long as you don't turn the console off. If you turn the console off, you do have to refight the final boss. But this is just another sign of, hey, this is a really difficult section that would be so incredibly frustrating, but they had the foresight to put a checkpoint in between these 2 boss fights that I feel like Metroid Prime 1 would not have. In fact, if you beat the first phase of that boss, in the final boss of Metroid Prime 1, and then you died during the second one, you do have to refight the entire thing again. So they took something that was good and they made it better in Metroid Prime 2. The theme of this whole video, something good to something great. After a few more attempts, we were able to take down Dark Samus and return to the light world before the dark world is destroyed forever, and the planet Aether and what remains of the Luminoth are saved. Truly, from start to finish, just an incredible gaming experience. I have loved just about every second of the first 2 Metroid Prime games, and I hope you like this video and subscribe, as I will be playing through and making a video on Metroid Prime 3 as I work on this video, and eventually Metroid Prime 4. In the meantime, while I continue to get through the Metroid Prime series, you should check out the first ever video I did on the channel and see my review after playing the original Metroid Prime this year for the first time. As always, thanks for sticking around until the end, and I will see you in the next one when we take on Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. Cheers.